Hello. It has been a challenging few days if you are anywhere remotely close to the Labour Party at the moment, perhaps to the point that challenging doesn't feel the right word to use. And as a result, we at LabourList thought, after some days of very hard work on our end that looked like they're only going to continue, to get together and speak about it. As much as we love writing our newsletter for you and updating the website constantly and our social media, the situation at present for the Labour Party following Thursday and Friday's election results mean this is something we felt was only appropriate to deal with in a thorough conversation between us. So, to my left, I am joined by senior reporter for LabourList, Daniel Green, and editor Emma Burnell, to discuss really how bad is this situation that Labour finds itself in today. Daniel, Emma, thank you so much for joining me today. So I guess the opening question is, was this to be expected or worse than expected? Emma, what do you think on that?
I think there are almost two opposing answers to that question. The expectation management coming out from some of the academics in particular were of higher numbers still. You know, we're talking about 1,800 to 2,000 councillors lost. Now, in that case, good result for Labour, but no. Nobody can look at these numbers and say that these are historic losses. This is far, far more than was lost by Tony Blair in his worst election while he was Prime Minister. And it really matters because this is not just numbers on a board. This is not a spreadsheet. These are people's lives and services. And Labour have not been trusted. And I would say that I think what we would get back from lots and lots of local councillors, it wasn't they personally who were not trusted, but Labour, the brand, is not trusted with those lives and services. And that is something that we absolutely cannot bank as, it wasn't as bad as we thought it could be.
And Dan, you and me, we travelled across the country, not just around London or in England for the local councils, but we spent a lot of time in Scotland and Wales as well. Is there a result in particular that shocked you most?
I wouldn't say it's a really difficult one, and to build on what Emma said, these are a disastrous set of elections. I think perhaps I was shocked by the scale of the losses in the South Wales valleys, but I can't say I'm surprised. I think when we were there, underlying, you could sort of feel that the air was coming out of the tyre a little bit. I think the Caerphilly by-election last year was a real indicator, and I think probably a bellwether of how things were going to come. I mean, obviously Labour got 11% in that by-election, and it turned out that Labour got 11% nationally as well. And I think that's a real reckoning, I think. But I think the scale of the losses in Wales can't be underestimated of how devastating it is to the party in Wales, and it's going to take a long time to pick back up from that.
I mean, down to 9 seats. I don't think that is something I would have expected. Even when we were there and we spoke to Ken Skates, who's now been chosen to become the interim leader of Welsh Labour, and has a massive job on his hands in terms of looking forward to how he tries to steer the party there in some sort of direction to make their way back from this. I remember he said to us that the polls don't keep him up at night.
Yeah.
Do you reckon they do now?
I probably would imagine they do. I have had a brief chat with Ken since he became leader, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying that he's described being interim leader as a poison chalice. And I think it is for anyone who takes up that role. It would be the same if Anna Sawar decides to carry on as Scottish Labour leader. I think that's still TBC at this point, and it'll be the case if there is I'm sure we're going to come on to this, whether there is a change of leader at the national level. It is a poison chalice at the moment because it's an incredibly difficult time for Labour. We are deeply untrusted among the public, and I think part of that comes down to a lot of the decisions that have been made by the government over many different mistakes that have been made, and I'm sure we'll touch upon that a little later as well.
Well, Emma, I think that goes back to the point you made about the Labour brand being damaged, and not in sort of any one place particularly, but across everywhere. I mean, where is the Labour brand still intact? Where do you look for to suggest there's any positivity that came out of this election?
I mean, I think, I don't think we should be glossing over it. There isn't an awful lot of positivity. There are still people who very much believe that Labour is the choice and should be the choice for the country, for their local areas. There are places where Labour held on, but that's not the same thing as the brand being strong. And I think those people are hoping that things will, to coin a phrase, only get better.
I think to build on your point there about if there is any sort of silver lining in all of this, I will say in my neck of the woods down in Ada, Labour managed to hold. They didn't manage to lose a single councillor, which was obviously a incredible feat against the tide that they face. But particularly interestingly, Labour managed to gain seats in Kensington and Chelsea and hold a council there. But in a way, I think that's even more damning because it's reflective of the sort of small selectorate that Labour have now become, that they now have more councillors in Kensington and Chelsea than they do members of the Senate.
Yeah.
Now.
And I think there is a real issue because the Labour fight now is going to be, do we try and win back those reform voters? Or, do we try and win back people from the Greens? Now, mathematically, it makes more sense to try and win people back from the Greens. Polling says that they're more open to voting Labour, that they are numerically, there are more seats where they could make a difference. Even those reform-facing seats, actually, it's the votes that went to the Green that let reform through. But if the Greens continue to behave strongly and poll strongly, then that choice between Labour or Green to stop reform becomes a lot harder. But actually, I've said this in the newsletter, I think that's the wrong way round of looking at this. It's not about, if we want to rebuild our brand rather than simply tear down other brands, obviously there's always a little bit of that in politics. You've got to present a choice. But that choice has to be about us having a strong, positive Labour offer to make. And if we simply go, we're chasing this group of voters or we're chasing that group of voters, none of that says to me, what is it that we joined the party for, that we want to see Labour do, that Labour can achieve and should be achieving, and then have a positive story to tell to whichever set of voters might be attracted to it?
Well, what we'll come on to later is today, on the day of recording, Dan has been to watch Keir Starmer's speech, which I think many Labour members, hopefuls that were perhaps on the fence, were hoping would be the moment to set that out. And we'll much later in the show, we'll go into whether he has or hasn't done that. But what I want to come back to is, as I say, we spent a lot of time essentially from post-Gorton and Denton up to this period, going and visiting around the country. And Dan, I want to ask, do you think the warning signs were there? We've touched on it a little bit already with Wales, but as a broad sort of overview of what you saw, were the warning signs there already that Labour should have been picking up on? And if so, why weren't they?
I think it's a really difficult one. I think the warning signs were there. I think we'd seen, I think you only had to look at the polls to see, the sort of the red lights on the dashboard. I think as we were travelling around the country, I did, obviously when we're here representing, LabourList going around the country, we'll be given a small window into what is actually sort of going on the doorstep, and a lot of that is sometimes restricted by the party in terms of what we can access. And I'm sure we can say now that we did have some difficulty in going to certain areas, particularly in London, where
Sunderland,
where we ended up doing incredibly badly. And I think that's part of the reason. There's a reason why that was. But even in the places we did go to, I think there were small cues from some of the people we talked to that things weren't going quite well. There was one candidate we spoke to in Wales who was talking about the need for Labour to be a bit bolder in its vision, and we've obviously now seen many MPs now coming out and saying,
PM.
and saying the exact same thing. And there was another candidate as well in Scotland who, we talked about how they're likely to be either a regional MS or there'll be a constituency one based on the polls at the time. And they made an off the cuff comment saying, "Or I'll be unemployed." And I think the fact that they made that comment said so much about the state of play in Scotland, more so than what we saw on the doorstep, which seemed predominantly in Scotland quite a bit of apathy.
I mean, Emma, when you were having these stories come back into LabourList and you were seeing what was being reported from Dan and myself on the ground, at what point did you think this genuinely could be quite ugly for the party?
So, full disclosure, I was supposed to go on these trips, but I broke my arm in February, so was very much sort of sat at home editing you two, watching you all have fun on the doorsteps. But what I think really struck me was that the story wasn't different in Wales, in Scotland, in the north of England, in the southeast. It was that everywhere was feeling like there isn't a narrative, there isn't a sense that Labour has given people a reason to vote for them. And we had really great individual candidates, you profiled them beautifully, but all of them were, I think what came through was that was the challenge they were facing, and that there wasn't an answer coming through from them as to, what can you do when that's the boulder you're trying to push up the hill.
Do you think morale was something that we struggled with?
I think candidates are extraordinary people. And there's a phrase that we use in politics called candidate-itis, right? So all candidates, whether they are in an absolutely hopeless seat that they're not going to win, or if they're in the world's safest seat, will both completely convince themselves at one point that they're going to win. And even if they're running for, say, Ada District Council, they'll convince themselves that that's the next step to being Prime Minister. Everyone has that moment in the bath, as we call it. And then equally, they all convince themselves that it's absolutely hopeless and they're going to lose. So it can be really difficult when talking to candidates to get from them, where is your head really at? But I think, as Dan said, there were just some of the off-the-cuff moments that came through where you could tell that however much they were trying to be positive, and you have to be to force yourselves back on those doorsteps day in, day out, that they felt that they were really, really up against it.
Well, I mean, when I ask about morale as well, I'm not solely thinking about the candidates themselves, but the membership too. Now, I know that we're awaiting still the figures to know exactly where the membership is for Labour at the moment, and I think we're expecting them to come around August time. Is that right?
August time is correct.
So, I mean, definitely keep an eye on LabourList for when we begin to analyse that. But Dan, I think we definitely heard around the country a few different times, different candidates tell us when we were having conversations with them that it was difficult to get members to turn out on the doorsteps. Do you, taking what Emma's said into consideration as well, do you agree or have any kind of thoughts that morale amongst the party as a whole was perhaps one of the problems? Labour members themselves struggling to see that narrative and then not feeling as enthused to go out onto the doorsteps and make the case for Labour.
No, absolutely, I agree, and I think that's part of the, I think part of the reason that we did so badly is also because of the sort of the struggle to get messaging out there, and messaging often includes sort of getting a leaflet through the door. And I think with a lot of CLPs, and I'm sure many of our readers and watchers will feel the exact same way, they've been hit with the double whammy of people have quit the party because they're frustrated and upset with the direction of the government for a myriad of different reasons. And then of those that remain, they don't feel positive about the government. If you look at the situation at the moment with the party doing so badly in the opinion polls, it would take you, the diehards, to really sort of go out on the doorstep. If you're disappointed with the government but you're sticking with it, then you might choose to stay at home, and then you have bundles of leaflets undelivered.
Well,
I would add to that, actually, that an awful lot of, you have to be really motivated to go on a doorstep at the moment, because the atmosphere in politics is so toxic that you don't know what you're going to be faced with. Never mind on the doorstep, you know, you abuse in the streets. We've seen this, particularly I think in Birmingham.
Yeah, yes.
So, you know, it's not simply a case of, do I like the Labour Party enough to go out, but do I like the Labour Party enough to go out and possibly face abuse as well? And that's something that is really worrying for a democracy, frankly. And I think we should reflect on that more broadly, because would I feel the same way if it was a reform canvasser being shouted at? I hope that I would.
Yeah.
But I would probably, in my heart, I'd care more about the Labour person.
Yeah.
And that's something we probably need to think about.
So the question that I really have overarching this, right, is that we did report on this, as did other people. You know, we've talked about polls, we've talked about the access to information that senior Labour Party figures, people in HQ could have seen and made certain decisions throughout especially the kind of post-Gorton and Denson period, which is what this election campaign, I think, really has been. You know, we went straight from the end of February into this run up to the start of May. It probably accounts for about 7 or 8 weeks. Yeah. You know, if the warning signs were there, which I think we've teased out they sort of were, why would Westminster ignore that? Why would Labour HQ not do something to try and deal with that? Or do we think they did and it failed?
Oh gosh, you really do ask the tough questions, James, which is why we have you as our fabulous reporter. I think there's a really boring process answer, which is it's actually quite hard to change gear in 6-7 weeks. You know, election campaigns are planned for months and months and months. I think the fairly meteoric rise of the Greens was, it maybe could have been expected, but wasn't nearly so much. So when we only kind of pivoted to thinking about that really in the last few weeks of the campaign.
Do you think that's fair though, considering we lost a heartland in Gorton and Denson? It was a huge majority, and we lost that to a Green. And that was outside of, a lot of the Green talk has been in and around London.
Yeah.
That's Greater Manchester. That's my neck of the woods.
Absolutely.
Right? And, you know, even so I obviously, you know, for those who've watched LabourList, I was there several times throughout that campaign in Gorton and Denson. And I'd be lying if I didn't say I bought into the lines that HQ was giving us, which was, this is a straight fight between Labour and Reform. It sort of made sense to me given the area, and the Greens came through. And surely that should have rang some alarm bells.
I'm sure it rang alarm bells, but there is a great deal of difference between knowing that you have to do something and knowing what that something is. And again, when you just look at the numbers on this election and the numbers of councils and votes that have gone straight from Reform to Labour, that's going to tell you one set of strategies. And when you think about the Green vote, whether that's them taking councils and councillors, or as you said, a constituency straight from Labour to the Greens, that will give you another set of strategies. The problem is that Labour hasn't picked a lane.
Yeah.
And whether we want to fight with Reform over who is best placed to represent that traditional working class vote, or whether we want to fight with the Greens over who is best placed to represent the progressive, possibly younger, university educated vote. Now, that's not an easy question for the Labour Party, and we should never pretend it is, because I think a lot of people do pretend that is, because the Labour Party, that first set of voters, that working class vote, that is what Labour was established to represent, right? And we are not a party without a love of nostalgia. So we think of ourselves as that vote. And of course, the union connection would mean that it would be very, very hard to not be fighting for that vote. But if you actually look at who our members and increasingly our voters are, they sit in the second bucket. Now, what Labour wants to do is find a sweet spot which will appeal to both those sets of voters, or enough of both of those sets of voters, the bits of those voters that are on the softer ends. But that is a tough needle to thread.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be that Labour needs to do what it has successfully done in the past, which is convince the young professional vote to vote for left-wing economic policies because they believe that it helps the whole country be better.
I think that's a really important point, because I think one of the things I noticed during the campaign is there was a City AM columnist who you might have seen, who, City AM, not necessarily the biggest fans of the Labour Party at the best of times, but came out saying that they were going to vote Labour at this election because they were worried about Reform and the Greens, and I think that's quite telling. But then
weren't they a traditional Tory voter? Is that right?
They were a traditional Conservative voter, but they were voting Labour to keep out the Green threat in their local area. But I think, we can't win elections by former Tories alone, and when we're losing our base.
And we can't win elections by saying we're better than that lot. We have to prove that we're good enough in our own right.
And that was something else I wanted to come to as well. I was taking a close look at the party's election broadcasts, and Labour's in particular, of course. And I think the really telling thing was we didn't really have a positive message to sell when we did those broadcasts. And obviously you can argue whether TV is important in these elections anymore.
But they went out on social media.
They certainly did, yeah. And so there were two about Iran, and that, the importance that we weren't in Iran. One was on the racism with the Reform, but nothing positive about
and the anti-Semitism within the
Greens.
Greens.
Of course, the anti-Semitism with the Greens.
But that's again that case of just pointing to the other and also not talking about local.
Let's not be idealistic here. I mean, let's be a little bit idealistic, obviously, but bringing down your opponents, depressing your opponent's vote share is a part of politics.
Oh no, of course.
It's something we've got to do, but if it's the only thing we're doing, that's a problem.
Because we're speaking about the voters, it seems like the right time to move into one of the big analytical questions of today. Why did voters turn away? Dan, if you were to give it one sentence, what would be the first thought that came to your head as to your experience of reporting over the last few weeks and months? Why have voters turned away from Labour?
We promised them change and they don't feel it yet, to put it bluntly. And I use my parents as a good analogy of the country as a bellwether of how the country feels. And I went to see them over the weekend, and they told me that they don't feel the change that the government promised. They're still waiting for some of the things that were going to happen. It feels that the pace of change has been too slow. My dad is works in a small business and was incredibly angry about what's been done to small businesses by the Chancellor. I mean, I don't think my dad's necessarily a typical Labour voter, but I think it's typical of how the country feels at the moment, and it's just that
they were promised one thing and given another.
Exactly, we put change on the front of the manifesto, and they don't feel that change yet.
So trust and betrayal in politics is something increasingly we're talking about more and more. I've definitely written about this in the newsletter as well, and the kind of, I'm not going to pretend it's easy, but the complicated task that Labour has of trying to restore trust. And exactly what Dan's just pointed to in relation to promising one thing, change, a word that could have so many meanings as well, which is part of the problem. But promising that and then failing to kind of deliver anything other than what we have got, which I think some people would categorise as a attempt to get back to some sort of status quo that people weren't necessarily happy with in the first place. And that's very much how Keir Starmer seemed to set it out today as well. But Emma, there's a few other places where trust and betrayal has come up, and we've heard people on the doorstep talk to us. I'd like to ask you about Gaza. Winter fuel. Is it fair for voters to feel a lack of trust or a feeling of being let down by this Labour government, considering what they had promised beforehand and what they've got now?
See, I think there are many problems. The Gaza thing is a separate issue, I think. The thing about the horrific situation in Gaza is that everybody would like it to be different, but nobody in the UK, up to and including the Prime Minister, can actually do anything about it. There's not a magic lever that you can pull to change the government of Israel into one that is more willing to work towards a two-state solution. not in this country, though obviously Israeli voters haven't, hopefully, Magic Labour. There isn't, but it's so emotive that once you start explaining that, you're losing, right? So that is one part. And I mean, I remember having a conversation with one of my local councillors who said that he'd met someone previous Labour voter who was voting Green, and he asked why. And she said, well, they're going to solve Gaza. And he was like, they're going to sit on a planning committee.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing. A lot of these independents and Greens, they did have, like, sometimes even on their campaign literature saying you're voting for Palestine.
Yeah.
And, I think there's going to be a lot of people, with the candidates included, who'll be going onto those, committees and thinking, well, I'm not.
But I think on the other things, winter fuel and welfare reform in particular, both of those things are things that we could have done in ways that didn't feel like this to the voters. And that, I think, is the cardinal sin. It is perfectly Labour to say the current welfare system does not work for anybody, right? It doesn't work for the taxpayers paying into it. It doesn't work for the recipients who feel that it's punitive, that it's bureaucratic, that it's just too difficult to actually get anything done. And it doesn't work for the people with those sort of median needs who could be supported into some forms of work, but there just hasn't been enough imagination in how that would work, how that can be done in a way that doesn't end up with cliff edges. And then the winter fuel allowance, look, it is kind of stupid that the people in the biggest houses in my constituency get this money to heat those houses, and me and my little 2-bedroom basement flat in Leighton doesn't, and I'm not. Yeah, and more than that, the people in the council estate down the road from me don't. They get the same amount of money as the people in the big houses, and that feels very wrong. That's not the argument Labour made, and too often we seem to be led by this sense that we have to balance the budget to keep the OBR happy, rather than think, what is the first principle? What do we want to do with welfare reform? What is a good welfare system? What does it look like? Design that, then work out how to pay for that. If it works as it should, it would end up with fewer people on welfare and less drain on the money. But there's probably an upfront investment cost to that first. And if you're only working on year by year or the best 5-year type spreadsheets, then you're never going to design the best system.
Now, I would like to touch on very briefly another area of lots of people would consider the appeal of reform being in line with some of their policies on immigration, which I find heinous, but like it appeals to some people. Immigration seems to be a complicated topic for Labour at the moment, with some reports suggesting that MPs want Shabana Mahmood removed from where she is and feel that the direction that the party's taken in regard to her reforms on immigration are wrong. I believe we've got polling that Dan might be able to give us a little bit of discussion on in regards to how the Labour membership feels about that as well. Equally, reform have gained a lot of support in this election, and we've seen some people on what many would consider the right of the Labour Party suggesting that, if anything, that vindicates the position that the likes of those who support Shabana Mahmood's immigration policy would take. How important a factor do we think immigration was in this election, or do we think actually this is much wider than that and more to do with reform being seen as an anti-establishment party than just the one of immigration?
I think that is a fair point about immigration. I think Reform are the sort of the party that dominate the conversation around immigration in the same way that UKIP did as a sort of the predecessor to that. I think there's obviously that anti-establishment vote there, but immigration is at the very core of reform's appeal to the sort of the wider electorate. Obviously, we, as you alluded to, we've done some polling that we'll be publishing soon. I think it's fair to say that the majority, if not the plurality of Labour members, are opposed to the changes that Shabana Mahmood is doing with immigration, and and on refugee status. But we all have to remember that the Labour membership isn't the wider public. And, I think Shabana Mahmood is trying to appeal to those people who are considering voting reform. I think the question is whether that's a demographic that's worth chasing if we can't win them back.
So just to summarise that sort of point of why Labour voters did turn away from us. One sentence, Emma. We've talked about change and such. Where do you think Labour needs to look now to gain people back? Where do you think they need to look forward to bring people back in to deliver the sort of, well, perhaps not the majority that they found in 2024, but to deliver a chance of renewing their term in government?
You need to feel better when you walk down your high street, when your bills drop on your mat, and when your pay slip arrives. Now, on the last point, I think we've done quite good work. But on the first two, the bills thing's obviously massively complicated by the war in Iran, which is why we should be really focused on making both net zero and nuclear power work so that we can have an independent energy system, that we are not at the whim of tyrants, be they in the Middle East or Middle America. But also, we need to be saying, just slightly winds me up. I was watching Richard Tice on the TV yesterday morning, and he keeps using this phrase, net stupid zero. Net zero, they're cramming it into the reform agenda. God knows why. I can't imagine where their funding might be coming from. But it's not, the voters generally aren't buying it. So I think that actually really having a positive British story to tell, with Great British Energy at the heart of it, is something that people can feel tangible change from. I think really beefing up the Pride in Place scheme so that people can see it on their high streets, can really feel that their streets are cleaner, they're safer, that you aren't worried that you're going to get your phone nicked every time you pull it out to answer a text message, which I think Dan's been doing a lot of over the last few days.
I think if we're thinking about how Labour would play the next general election, let's say, there's lots of people that have said there's like 3 different ways of contesting election. It's time for a change, Britain's on the right track, don't look back, or better the devil you know. And I think if
Danny Finkelstein.
Copyright Danny Finkelstein there. But I think if there were an election now, we'd be saying better the devil you know, and probably struggling to make that case. And
that's the weakest of the 3.
Yeah, and so we need to make the case that Britain is on the right track, and that is those quick wins and showing people that they do have more money in their pocket, that their community is getting better and safer. And
I think that's a case of it has to be consistently right.
The thing about voters is they tend to not say thank you, they tend to say what's next.
Exactly.
And the problem is a lot of the stuff that the government is doing, particularly say the Renters Reform Bill, the Act that has just come into force, it takes time to get through Parliament. And I think so obviously we went into the election where we've only just passed it and people haven't felt the benefit of it yet. And I think that's
and there is a sense that some of this is midterm. That is always a problem. But politics moves so quickly now, and no councillor, former councillor who's woken up on Friday, Saturday morning without their seat anymore is going to say, oh, well, it's just midterm, please.
So let's move briefly, and we will have to keep it brief because we haven't got as much time as a problem as large as this probably takes to dissect. However, briefly, I'd like to move just onto the political geography of the situation, right? Yes, there was damage and problematic results across the country as a whole, but I'd like to sort of take in time each area in particular to talk about specifically what went on there. So if we could, can we start with Scotland, please? Dan, we spent some time in Scotland. Could you give me a brief summary of what you think went wrong for Labour, why Labour failed to make the gains in Scotland that they wanted to, especially after 19 years of SNP power that, we saw even when we went out on the doorsteps. Many people were very, questioning. They were unhappy with the SNP. They didn't feel like they were delivering for them. And still, Labour struggled to make any sort of improvement that you could look towards.
There was a lot of apathy, I think, in Scotland. I think there was a frustration with the SNP government, that's no doubt, but polling in the run-up to that election showed that people hated the UK government more. And so I think people were less inclined to vote for Labour as a result of that. And they split into the sort of the kaleidoscope of different parties, into the Greens, where obviously they picked up a few constituency seats for the first time, into Reform as well, and the sort of the myriad of other parties as well. The Liberal Democrats, of course, doing quite well at the election too. So I think it ended up, the sort of anti-SNP vote ended up splitting in loads of different ways. We didn't really have much of a way to combat, and the squeeze messaging evidently didn't work as effectively as we would have wanted. I think part of that was obviously on the national government, but a part of it is on the campaign in Scotland as well. Clearly,
so the line of it's us or the SNP didn't work.
Evidently not. And
we
also,
just don't live in that world anymore. I think we've got to get out of that. It's us, only the X can beat the Y.
Well, that's
We're
very
in
much
five-party politics now,
yeah.
and if we don't get with that program and work out how to do that, then we're done.
Okay, now we'll move on to Wales, Emma. As we said earlier, a complete collapse of what was once a Labour heartland, a place where many people, especially when they were reporting on the day and the results were coming in, were talking about, so much of the Labour movement was baked in Wales. So much of it is tied to that part of the UK. And we've now seen Baroness Morgan resign, down to 9 seats. I mean, just a complete battering. What would you say went wrong there?
I think in part it is that sense of nostalgia again. I think that stymies us in two ways. First of all, it can make us complacent. Oh, it's Labour Wales, there'll always be Labour Wales, and not enough work is then done to give a distinctive Welsh offer, rather than them feeling like a branch office of the UK. And then B, also, because we tend to look back to, those founding fathers, be that, an Aaron Bevan or even Neil Kinnock, who came from a mining family, we have this sense of a very kind of old-fashioned sense of Wales, rather than dealing with the problems of Wales in 2026. And
so, Dan,
sorry, I do want to just chime in because there has been, as you've been talking, I've been keeping an update of what's been going on. Chris Curtis, who is the leader of the Labour Growth Group, quite an influential group in the party, has now joined calls for the Prime Minister to resign.
To resign immediately or to set a timetable?
He wants the Prime Minister to set out a timetable, and he's going to be signing Catherine West's letter, which I'm sure we can discuss a little later as well.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think it's right that we probably get onto that pretty soon. Just very briefly then, Dan, if you could give me a bit of a summary of England, both looking to the north and areas like Sunderland, the collapse in Greater Manchester breaks my heart. I grew up in Bolton. Wigan is next door. And to watch all this, was it every seat we contested in Wigan went to Reform?
There were real devastating results across the country. There's one particular video, I forget the council, but there's a council leader who'd been in charge for decades.
Barnsley?
I think it was, who'd been in charge for years. And it's heartbreaking to see that council fall.
So where are we in England and in London? And I do think there's a distinction to be made between those two, the north of England and the situation there, places like Sunderland as well. Where are we there? And then also, if you could give me actually, Emma, I think you might be better come to on London as a Londoner, as a proud Londoner. Dan, if you could just give me a little bit on England and Emma, then yourself on.
Well, I think this is what happens when the party loses its core voting bloc. We're seeing that fall away to the Greens, and then you have Reform or the Tories, is the case in Westminster, or the Greens ending up sort of winning in different parts of the country where they would not have necessarily have done particularly well. I think we've not given, as we've talked about before, we've not given people a reason to vote for us, and that's this is where we're at when that happens. Where I'm from in Watford, Watford doesn't elect many Labour councillors, and even though we've got a Labour MP, but they lost all of them there. And it was the same in Three Rivers, which is nearby. And it's, that's a story that has been played across the entire country. And it's a real shame. And I feel very sorry for all of those really hardworking councillors who have done amazing work in their local areas because it isn't their fault.
And London, Emma.
And London, again, I mean, it's a similar diagnosis because it is that core progressive vote that I'm afraid we have told for too long. Oh well, if you don't like it, you don't have to vote for us. And they went, well, all right, then we won't.
What was the quote? If you don't
like the changes, you can leave. There's the door.
Yeah, and I'm afraid
they walked through it.
And that's not how. Look, we are in five-party politics, and that does mean that things are slightly different. We aren't the broad church party necessarily that we would aspire to be under two-party politics, but it still doesn't mean that you close off your mind to anyone who doesn't agree with you 100%. I mean, I've watched so many campaigns, political parties, and issues become that Puritan spiral, and if that's the way that Labour presents itself, you're either exactly like us or you're not welcome. That's just a route to oblivion.
Okay, so we're going to come on to the bit that I'm sure lots of people have been waiting for, which is where we stand today. Now, to begin with, I'm going to ask you both a question that I just want a one-word answer to, but I would like you to pay a lot of attention to the words that I choose to use in the phrasing of my question. In the current situation, is this recoverable? Yes or no?
It's a really difficult question. I think obviously we'll talk about the speech. As it currently stands, I don't think it is.
Is it recoverable? Yes. Am I confident we will recover it? No.
Okay. Which leads us on to the next question. Now, I won't give you a yes or no for this because I think it wouldn't be right for LabourList to ask it in those terms. But we are an honest, and I underline that word, friends to the Labour Party. Honestly, when we were out on the doorstep, whether in Wales, Scotland, the north of England, or in London, there was one question that did come up time and again. And I'm sure you will not be surprised, neither will he. He made reference to it this morning, that question is over the trust that is in the Prime Minister and his ability to do this job. So, how much of this do you think was about the Prime Minister specifically?
Obviously, as the head of the government, he has to take responsibility for what's happened to Labour. I think there'll be elements in each of these areas where local councils may have had some influence. I mean, just look at the situation with Birmingham and the bin strike. I mean, I don't think we can question that had an influence on how people voted. And it would be the same true in Wales, where people felt that they wanted to change because Labour had been in charge ever since the formation of devolution. And no doubt some people will say or question whether the Scottish Labour's campaign was as bold as it could have been to try and convince people to wean themselves away from the SNP. But overriding all of that was that we ended up fighting the local elections almost on sort of a national, on national issues. And the national environment wasn't favourable to us.
Yeah, I mean, the Reform made this a referendum on Keir Starmer.
That was their get Brexit done this time, wasn't it? It was, or take back control. It was get Starmer out. That was the 3-line slogan they went with.
That absolutely, and it would be ridiculous to pretend that wasn't a big part of it. And it drives me mad, and I get why they do it. But when cabinet ministers say, "Oh, it's not coming up on the doorsteps," I'm like, "You haven't been on any doorsteps then."
Why do you think people don't like him?
I think the problem is that Starmer's offer in many ways is that he's kind of a blank slate technocrat, right? I'm going to do the things well, and I'm just going to roll up my sleeves and get on with it. And he is that technocrat. And I think that has two problems. First of all, the sort of blank slate part of it. Before he was Prime Minister, you could project all of your hope onto that blank slate, all of it. He was going to solve everything. And Labour did nothing to clarify what that offer was, because at that point, the electoral advantageousness was in getting everyone to believe that he was going to solve whatever it was that they particularly cared about. The problem with that is that that was a strategy that only worked until July 2024. And after that, that blank slate element means that you can project all of your disappointment, all of your anger, all of your, well, my life isn't changing enough, onto this one human being. Neither of those cases were particularly fair. He was neither the Messiah nor a very naughty boy, right? So that's part of it. And then the other part is that he's a very technocratic person. And because I'm a bit of a dork, I quite liked that about him at times. I remember reading the Tom Baldwin book about him, and my favourite anecdote was his pride in changing the record system of the DPP. And, you know, that he'd made this quite technocratic change, but it had made real difference as how that organisation worked. Now, that's fine, but technocracy does not work in a speech. It doesn't work to voters. And it, unfortunately, when he tries to step out of his skin, of this natural comfort zone of being a technocrat, it doesn't really work because it's not who he is.
See, it comes across inauthentic.
So either you get the authentic technocrat or the inauthentic guy delivering a speech that doesn't really sound like he means it.
So your diagnosis is almost one of the authentic technocrat was great for a campaign where you could project your desires for something different, and this guy looks like he can just get things done. And then after the fact, when you want a philosophy and a leader and a vision, that's perhaps lacking, because when he tries to do that, it comes across as inauthentic.
I mean, I think there's a difference between asking for a philosophy, which I think he's perfectly capable of putting together. He's a clever bloke. He's got beliefs.
What are they?
I think he comes from this sort of lower middle class background, working class. And it's about, if you look at what he was really passionate about this morning, it was about the ways in which too many things that are supposed to help people to get on and live a happy, comfortable life actually get in their way. And that can be fixed through technocratic solutions. It can't be sold through technocratic language. So I think there is...
Can it be fixed quickly as well?
No, none of it can be fixed quickly. And the problem is that if you run on the one word slogan change, then people expect it to be fixed quickly. I suggested before the election that we actually run on the slogan, let's fix Britain. I think that would have given us more space to actually talk about the journey of fixing rather than the instant of change.
Now, what I would like to ask then, in respect to all of that, and the situation that we find ourselves in, where, Dan, as you say, there's, still, while we're doing this podcast, people coming out and saying they would like either a timetable or for him to just go. We talked earlier about the Labour brand taking a hit. Are these problems around Keir Starmer, is that where responsibility lies for the brand taking a hit? Keir Starmer and the brand are one of the same, and people don't like Keir Starmer, and therefore they don't like Labour. Labour becomes an emblem of him. Is that what's going on or not?
I mean, we have to hope that it's a case that Starmer and Labour become wedded in people's minds, and that if Starmer were to be separated from that and a new leader were to come in, that potentially, there might be some hope of regaining trust and trying to, redress some of the problems we have. I think if we can't fix that with a new leader, if there is a new leader, I think we are we're screwed, to put it frankly.
But
So
how do we get out of that?
I saw you shaking your head when I phrased that question in that way to Dan. Is it Starmer that's damaged the brand? You were shaking your head. What do you think then has damaged the brand instead of him?
That's not what I was shaking my head at. I think the problem is that we want a quick fix too. We want a quick change too. And actually, there are deeper, more structural questions that Labour members and Labour MPs and Labour people at all levels avoid asking themselves by having the displacement activity of talking about one human being and their job. Now, whether or not Keir Starmer stays in post, whether or not it's right or wrong for him to do that, that's actually a different question from what is it that Labour is for, what is it that Labour should be doing. And if we just have the conversation about who should lead us rather than where we should be being led to, then we will struggle, I think, to actually change.
So, Dan, you were at the speech this morning. This was built up over the weekend as to be his moment to clarify that there was a destination, that he was going to take us there. And, as I say, he acknowledged in his speech that he has his doubters and he's okay with that because he wants to take, I think the way he framed it was to take the responsibility of taking us to that next place, as well as take the responsibility of the results. Immediate feeling in the room while you were there, also, as a Labour member as well as a journalist reporting for LabourList, immediate feeling, do you think, one, he got that message across well, and two, that it worked as a result?
So I will say that the room was packed full of loyalists, as you'd expect. The room were obviously very pleased to see Keir Starmer, and he did come out fighting. I did feel there was a passion in there, and it felt like he was, he wasn't shouting, but he was sort of loud in voice, particularly when he was talking about not inflicting the same leadership chaos of chopping and changing leaders that the Tories inflicted, and not inflicting that on the country again, and saying he said that Labour wouldn't be forgiven if we did that again. I think that is obviously a fair point, and it's not a position that any of us want to be in. And I think that was very receptive. I think one of the things we saw as well was that some of the journalists were heckled when they brought up questions around the leadership by some of the people in the room, and it shows the passion.
And he did close that down straight away.
He did, yes, but it shows the passion that some of these people have, that, there are people that really think that any sort of change in leader would be disastrous for the party, and it's a direction that we can't take. On the substance, however, of because I think the speech was touted as being this was a sort of make or break. Lots of MPs coming into this speech wanted to see a more radical Keir Starmer, a more radical change that was being proposed. Whether that was, I saw some people talking about whether they should have announced an elected House of Lords, for instance. So I don't think that's ever really going to happen. But he came out, and obviously I think British Steel, the announcement on British Steel, I think is fantastic. One MP did point out that Grangemouth has already fallen by the wayside 2 years ago, and so asking why that wasn't done sooner.
Which MP was that done?
Ewan Steinback, who was already calling for the Prime Minister to go. It should be said. But then among the other policies for the offer for young people, I think fell a bit flat, dare I say, because I don't we talk I think some of us, particularly of my generation, would have been hoping for something on student fees and student loans. There wasn't any.
I thought he was leading to make an announcement on that. I felt like as he was talking, I was like, oh, we've seen so much buzz around this. Is that where he's going to? And then it wasn't. It was on job security and apprenticeships.
The King's speech is in 2 days' time, and that's supposed to be where the big legislative.
But of what's been reported, it doesn't sound like anything like that is coming down the track. And on Europe, it was kept quite ambiguous around, talking about wanting to be at the heart of Europe, but not necessarily outlining what that looks like in practice.
Yeah, and some of the briefing is like at the heart of Europe, but not crossing any of our red lines. And
I do want to just read this from Emma Lewell, from the MP for South Shields, who's who's obviously listened to the speech and has said that she feels desperately sad, angry and frustrated. She hasn't gone as far as saying that the Prime Minister should go, but she said that the British public doesn't want to hear another narrative or a story, or to hear why we do what we do. They just want us to deliver, and rightly so. And then particularly on Europe, being obviously an MP in a Leave voting area, She said she despairs. She said the speech was written by the same internal echo chamber that got us into the mess. As I say,
immediate reaction to that?
Again, this is what we said right at the very top. We are going to have to pick a lane. But it is not the case necessarily. Now, I don't know the specific voter breakdowns of South Shields off the top of my head. I'm sure Dan does. But it's not a case of we have to appeal to all of the people who voted Brexit 10 years ago. What we have to do is coalesce the people who agreed with us. Both 10 years ago and more now. And if we just keep trying to tread this middle path, I just think we'll get run over.
Now, we have just 2 minutes left. So I think I've really appreciated the conversation today, and I hope that viewers of LabourList and people who watch this will feel the same. Obviously, things are moving really quickly. Really quickly, to the point that, as we said on this podcast alone, Dan has had to check his phone to see who is getting in touch with him to let him know.
I have had an MP try and call me as we've been talking as well.
Exactly. And so, look, first and foremost, for anyone who wants to know where MPs are at, Dan is doing an excellent job at tracking this. We've got a tracker up on the website at the moment that is updating constantly as to which MPs are saying. You
can see Dan's fingers are itching to get back to his laptop.
So we're keeping tabs on that, and do stay tuned to LabourList and all of our channels, both the website and our social media, as we continue to report on events as they move. Just a final point to leave us with. What happens next, in your opinion, in one sentence? Dan, we'll start with you.
The toothpaste is sort of coming out of the tube, and it's going to be hard to put it back in. There's almost 50 MPs calling for the Prime Minister to just at least set out a timetable for his resignation. I think it's going to be hard to fight that now. So I think it's going to be. We're going to get to a point where the Prime Minister may be pushed into setting a timetable at some point.
And Emma?
I think that's probably right, although never underestimate the ability of the Labour Party to not make its mind up properly. I think we've got a Prime Minister who is fighting for his job. I think he was open about that this morning. So what happens next is the King's speech. I think that what we do or don't here in terms of the legislative agenda going forward, and whether that sets out the kinds of things that will make MPs go, you know what, actually I'm on board with this if we can message it right, if we can actually deliver what we say we're going to deliver, or whether they're like, nah mate, that's too thin a gruel, I'm not having it.
Well, there we go. So of course, LabourList will keep you updated throughout the entirety of however the next few days, weeks, months play out. If you've liked what we've done today, please make sure to let us know. Leave some feedback, drop a like, share it if you'd like to. I think we're all in agreement that we'd love to do more of these, and we especially have the opportunity to do that with your support. So I'd like to thank all of the friends of LabourList as well. If anyone wishes to support independent Labour journalism, I mean, we must highlight we are not the party. While we report on the party, we aren't them. We don't make the decisions. We simply find out what they are, and we make sure that you're aware of them as well. To do that, it does take support from our friends, so we're really grateful to them. And we've got tomorrow our In Conversation for Friends with Baroness Aisha Hazarika, which I'm sure, if you've enjoyed the conversation we've had today, to get another person who has been so up close to the heart of politics and was doing the live reactions as results were coming through on Sky and did an excellent job of that. She will be sitting down with Emma tomorrow to discuss.
We might laugh a bit more.
Yeah, it might be a little bit more joyful than today's post-mortem of the Labour Party's experience on Thursday and Friday last week. But thank you very much both to Daniel Green, Senior Reporter for LabourList. Where can people find you, Dan?
I'm at Dan Green Journo on Twitter.
Yeah.
Sorry, X, as it is now.
Yeah. And Emma, where can people find you?
Usually on my sofa with the cat. But no, I'm at Emma Burnell _ on Twitter, and just at Emma Burnell on Blue Sky. But I'm at neither of them as often as other people, because they are a nightmare.
Yeah, so, give both of these guys a follow. They'll be putting out some more great pieces onto the LabourList website in the next few days.
And where can they find you, James?
Yeah.
They can find me in the LabourList newsletter, which you should sign up to if you haven't already, or they can find me at jtibbittsjourno on X, though I don't really put that much on there for whatever. I use it more as an opportunity to research. But anyway, thank you so much both for joining me and for talking about where the Labour Party finds itself in what is probably the most troubling time since 2019 for them.
And do subscribe to our newsletter, because you'll hear from all three of us. And as I think you may have noticed today, we've all got very different characters. So you get a real wide range of voices and views.
Yeah, but thank you very much. And we will bring you more soon. Bye-bye.